Welcome to the Thriving Misfits, the podcast where we celebrate resilience, embrace diversity, and challenge norms. I'm your host, Fiona Young, and in this episode, I'm thrilled to introduce Michelle, a mindfulness practitioner whose journey began through her own struggles with disordered eating and corporate burnout. After years of feeling trapped in a cycle of excessive doing, Michelle discovered her transformative power of mindfulness, emotional regulation, empathy, and self-compassion, shifting her life towards a state of simply being. Michelle has immersed herself in some of the world's most renowned secular mindfulness and wellness programs, including mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, through the UC San Diego Center of Mindfulness, Mindful Schools, the Center of Mindful Self-Compassion, and the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, a program first developed at Google. Today, she shares her expertise through public programs as part of the associate faculty at Singapore Management University. So join us as we explore Michelle's inspiring journey, the power of mindfulness and healing, and how these practices can help us all lead a much more balanced and fulfilling life. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Fiona, for having me and the warm introduction.
Absolutely. I think we have not really known each other for too long. I believe we met first of all on LinkedIn, right?
Yes. That's how people meet these days.
I know, and I just resonated with your story and with your background, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. But the audience, of course, would like to get to know you a little bit better. So let's just kick it off with some really fun questions, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So if you can create a mindfulness mascot or, a mindfulness mascot to promote DEI in the workplace, what would be its name? And also what message does it bring?
Yeah, thank you so much, Fiona, for that. You know, when I first saw this question, I really cracked my brains over it because it had to represent DEI. And I thought really long and hard about what was out there and what wasn't. And I came up with Paz the panda. And I chose the panda because it's an Asian symbol, and at the same time, it also embodies tranquility, peace, and just really allowing people to know that it's okay to take a pause, like a panda, and just like how our bodies need to rest, we can just be like the panda to take meaningful breaks to recharge mentally and physically.
Oh, I love that. And pandas are just adorable, right? Have you ever seen a panda in life,
I,
in
I
real life?
have, I have. And you know what? As we're speaking, my son has three panda stuffies on his bed. My daughter has one, and some of them are from a place called Chengdu in China, which my husband brought
Yes.
back recently. So yeah, talking about pandas.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, maybe some people don't know that about me. I actually have gone through a mindfulness based stress reduction training myself in 2017. Actually, I loved it. And I've seen now that you've also done MBSR. The thing is, with all these mindfulness things, I feel it needs to be much more, um, appreciated, especially by individuals who may think that mindfulness is just for hippies, right?
Yeah.
Now, I've also been talking with my friends who are in this space, whether we want to run a retreat. And so just imagine, right? We are going to run a misfit mindfulness retreat. What's the most unconventional activity that you would do that would be part of the agenda?
I would love to do something that I haven't done before, and that's a death meditation activity. It's something that's been on my mind for a while now, but I really haven't quite found the avenue to do it. But since you asked that question, I could just, think of what I would love to do if I had, free reign over creating a retreat or running a corporate retreat. And it's really that concept of contemplating our own deaths. So, morbid as it sounds, it's actually a celebration of life because very often we think that we have so much more time ahead of us. But the only true moment that we have is the only moment we have right now, which is the present moment. And that is the very essence of mindfulness, where we are just here in the present moment. We're not in the past. We're not in the future. So contemplating about the early memories, the scenes that we have lived through leading up to death, can actually be quite a spiritual journey or the process for people, and it can in fact enhance the way we look at things, our zest for living as well. It's not coined by me. It's something that I picked up in one of the Buddhist traditions some time ago.
Wow. I mean, that's something, I do ask my coaching clients oftentimes when they are like in that corporate rat race, right?
Yeah.
I do ask them, so if you are at your deathbed, who is going to be around you and what are they going to say about you? And I
Yeah.
think this whole death meditation that you've just mentioned, I think it just brings us to that moment where we need to understand what we truly value in life and what brings us true joy and enthusiasm, right?
Yeah. And when I was a participant in this activity before, I was the instructions were to write our own eulogy. And I remember when
Mm.
I started writing it and contemplating about what I wanted out of life, I actually teared and cried quite a fair bit of tears as well. And when you just read that out loud, it's amazing um, how this activity it can feel a little bit strange and more a bit awkward at the start, but at the same time it's also so enlightening, and it brings
Mm.
different depths of thinking that and introduces different ways of thinking that you would not have seen in as we go around our day to day. So that was quite transformational for myself. So if I had to run a retreat, I would gladly introduce it.
Oh, please do so. And, writing your own eulogy, I think this just really, it boils down in terms of like, what is the essence of
Mm,
our being, right? And what is it that we want to be known for? What is the
yeah,
legacy that we want to leave behind? All right. Now let's go back to your childhood, Michelle.
yeah.
Were there any early signs or experiences that you felt, it foreshadowed your journey into mindfulness and wellness?
So I grew up in a really typical Chinese Asian traditional household where I was kind of conditioned to believe that I must study hard, get a good degree, get education, graduate from university, and then eventually lead kind of like the traditional female life, getting a good husband, and then your life is set. So I was never really given a lot of opportunities to explore the areas that I was mildly curious about. So even art, for example, I was told
Mm.
that I shouldn't be pursuing art classes because they were a waste of money. It's not going to go anywhere. So I never really had the chance to explore. And I just thought that getting good grades were just kind of like the help me to open up more doors towards
Mm.
success. So I did just about that. And I felt that, yeah, when I was thrown into the working force after I graduated, that could be, yeah, it's really far from the truth and or what I had envisioned in my head. And it wasn't until a couple of years of working that I started to experience my own mental health challenges, panic attacks, and burnout that then led into that uh, really that journey into inner healing
Mm.
and just opened up my eyes into the different modalities that were out there that could heal me and my struggles at that point in time. So it wasn't until my 20s, and I had to come back undo a lot of the conditioning, like decades
Mm.
of conditioning, and it wasn't really a pretty process, if I could just put it that way. Yeah.
Well, you suffered from a burnout, and I wanted to hear a little bit more how you experienced it because I myself, I actually was in corporate also for 14 years in oil and gas. And over the 14 years, I actually made my role redundant twice. And the first time was actually in Germany. So I had to
It must have been difficult.
relocate. Yeah, I had to relocate activities, finance activities from Germany to countries like India, Poland, Philippines. And then not only did I have to tell my team members that they would lose their jobs, but including myself. Like the ironic thing is that if I would be successful with the change
Yeah.
management project, I'll also be losing my job. So That didn't really, yeah, it didn't really cause the burnout per se. It was more working with my line manager at that time who, some bosses, they tell you one thing today and then they change their mind the next day. So it's very
Yeah,
contradicting. And I just didn't know how to manage that. And then I had this nervous breakdown in the office where I just couldn't stop crying. And I felt like it was almost more physical than emotional, that I just
yeah,
couldn't control myself. And I didn't even know how I got back to my home because I was driving, and I was just completely in almost like a trance. How
yeah.
did the corporate burnout show up for you?
I think for me, it wasn't overnight, as with
Mm,
every mental health condition, it's not overnight. So I think it really all started in school. In school itself, just living that life of chasing after something that wasn't really truly aligned with what I wanted. Because so your earlier question was what experiences might have foreshadowed my journey into mindfulness and wellness. And it just really, I suddenly thought that about the fact that in year one of university, I actually wanted to major in psychology. But
mm,
because I got a D or an E, I can't remember, but it was like kind of the worst grade. And it was really crushing for for a typical Asian uh, student who had pretty good grades her entire life. And I shunned away from psychology.
mm,
So going back to your question, I think those early days for me, I knew that something was off, but I just didn't know how to even articulate about it or even tell people about it. So it really started from that misalignment into school and then an extension of that into the workplace. I majored in communications and new media. We were studying about radio and newspapers. And by the time I graduated, it was not the era for newspapers and radio. So having that root shock of having to adapt to the new world, I didn't go into burnout overnight, but it started from like panic attacks. So very
mm,
similarly, physiologically, I had started hyperventilating. I didn't know what to make out of it. I even saw a GP. He just kind of dismissed the problem. He's like, "Oh yeah, you're probably having stress at work." Because I did ask him like, "Is it asthma? Like, do you think that I could be suffering from adult asthma, or it just started developing later in life?" So it started from that. I also engaged in not really healthy coping mechanisms like smoking and drinking. And eventually, my health really suffered when it escalated into the eating disorder, which is
mm,
bulimia and body dysmorphic disorder. And and it was hard because physically I was suffering, but mentally it was even worse because I felt like there was no way out for me at that point in time. And mental health at that time, it's not something that's talked about frequently. People
mm.
really shun you like the plague, or they look at you like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" But right now, I'm heartened that it's normalizing and it's easier for the younger generation. That people that were like kids or youths that are my age at that point in time, they feel more comfortable in sharing about their own struggles.
I think that's really important, especially for us living here in Asia, where I think our parents' generation, they don't really even understand the struggles with regards to mental health. They don't necessarily understand that people actually have those challenges. And like you said, if you're even looking for a therapist or a psychologist, people think that you're
Yeah,
completely cuckoo, right?
yeah,
Um, Now you mentioned about your bulimia and body dysmorphia, and one of the things that resonated with me when I read through your bio, when you connected with me on LinkedIn, is exactly that. And not a lot of people know that about me, and it's not something that I keep secret of, but it's also not something that I've previously openly disclosed that I used
yeah,
to suffer from bulimia, anorexia, body dysmorphia for definitely bulimia for more than 20 years. And, having met you even virtually, I just felt like
Yeah.
there's someone who truly understands where I'm coming from. And having bulimia for 20 years, definitely I'm grateful that my body is coping very well with that. And the whole recovery process was, I would say, considerably smooth as well.
Mm.
Now, can you share with us what initially led you to develop an eating disorder? And also, how did those early days look like for you?
So, so at that time when I was kind of burning out or being really disillusioned with work, I turned to unhealthy coping mechanisms. So like eating, smoking, drinking, but also I had this obsession with exercising, like movement. I was kind of exercising, I think 5 or 6 times a week.
Mm.
So and they were all pretty intense, high intensity interval trainings, running, power or vinyasa yoga, not like the slower kinds of yoga. And my body was just kind of pushing through all of that. So I looked actually pretty fit at that time with a very low body fat percentage. But it just kind of, I think it all just compounded. That then came into, oh, I look good, so I needed to maintain that. And then I started counting calories.
And not only that,
And
right?
yeah,
People would actually compliment you on
yeah,
this new amazing body,
yes.
and it just makes you feel like you want to continue doing that.
And it's that cycle. It's that cycle they feed into your ego, or like what you feel validated, even though it's kind of unhealthy, but you feel validated that your efforts are paying off. Or at least that was for me. And yeah, so couple that with like over exercising, under eating, counting calories. At some point, I even paid thousands of dollars just to go to a slimming center and to have like, it was kind of like a TCM slimming center. So you do cupping and gua sha. And I was under 50 kilos or around there at that time. I wasn't, big by any side, yeah, measure. But when I saw myself in the mirror, it was a completely different story because I saw myself as double or triple that size. There was always something that I wasn't happy with. Like, oh, my
Yeah.
arms are still not lean enough. My thighs are too
Yeah.
fat. Maybe I need to do surgery on my chin and my jaw. So the early days were characterized by all of those, and it eventually led into kind of like the peak of bulimia and body dysmorphia, where I started to binge, kind of eat. So from under eating to kind of
Mhm.
overeating, binging and then purging in secrecy. So nobody knew about it, like in the middle of a dinner with friends, which was really, really hard to be in a
Mm.
social gathering. I would just excuse myself, like nobody would know that you're actually going to the toilet to purge. And that, I think at the peak, it was around 10 to 15 times a day. Yeah, so the
Mm.
body was just undergoing through so much suffering and so much pain. And I thought that was normal, like 10 to 15 times. But apparently, when I shared it with like therapists and like medical professionals, they're like, oh my gosh, that's actually a really, really high number.
Mm.
It's not like 2 or 3 times like the normal meals, but you're just eating and purging. And some days it was just like nothing that came out except
And
water
it
and
takes
that
it
bowel.
takes over your
Yeah,
life, right? Like you're doing
yeah,
it 10 times per day and it's just taking over your life. I still remember back in the days. I mean, I didn't do it for 10 times a day, but it has been a very long duration, right? 20
yeah,
years. And like you said, everything is happening in secret. I felt like I was the best liar. No one ever knew. Seriously, no one ever knew,
yeah,
except of course, like my closest family,
yeah,
my husband. But it's basically, I mean, a lot of stress on your body, but at the same
yeah,
time it's also, I think, it's almost like that self punishment, right? That we have
yeah,
indulged, that we have binged. I cannot imagine that you've been doing it 10 times per day, but I think everyone everyone's eating disorder shows up differently as well.
yeah,
And I think now in hindsight that we reminisce and that we reflect on it.
Yeah.
It sounds really almost like crazy, right?
It is. And I remember thinking to myself so many times that when am I going to see the light at the end of the tunnel? Because
Mhm.
the moment I took a step forward, it almost felt like I was taking two steps back, and that cycle just wouldn't stop for years. And it wasn't until I sought professional help that truly kind of broke me out of that cycle. Yeah,
Mm.
but that part on self punishment is so right. Like I didn't recognize it at that point in time that it was self punishment, but it is. Yeah,
And
you
I
are.
think it's also, I'm not sure about you, but I don't really like to relinquish control. And I think that's also part of something that, part of your life that you can control. I can eat as much as I want, but yet I can control how much I weigh, how much I look like. And then we go through that.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, for me, I started off in my teenage years, so
Mm,
very different early stages from your experience. So I was about 14 years old, and I was hanging out with this group of girls who, almost if you have seen the movie Mean Girls, they were almost like that, and they have done crazy diets, like just drinking Diet Coke for the entire week and having an apple a day. And that's, I just looked up to them. I wanted to be part of their clique. And so you just
yeah.
feel forced to participate. And
Mm,
I'm glad to hear that you found help, professional help to,
mm,
overcome bulimia, overcome that disordered eating. Personally, unfortunately, I've never had that opportunity or that support. I was diagnosed in the US when I was about 16, 17 years old. I was there for an exchange program. My my host mother was a retired nurse. And
mm,
you don't even need to be a retired nurse or a medical professional to see that something's wrong with me, because I arrived to the States with about 52 kg. And I then was so petrified of how people looked over there. A lot of people in my circle were obese, and I just felt, oh, I don't want to look like them, especially after that high school year. And so I basically restricted my entire eating, and the little things that I ate, I also purged it. So
yeah.
my host mom obviously noticed something was wrong, because from 52 kg, I actually reduced almost to just 40 kg. And looking back at those photos, it's horrifying. I feel so sad seeing myself that way. But in that moment, obviously, you don't recognize it.
Yeah.
And it was so embarrassing, right? And I believe we spoke before about that. Actually, when I was at the doctor's and they diagnosed me with bulimia already, one of the nurses came up to me and asked me whether I had really great abs because I'm constantly throwing up.
That is so insensitive. I still can't believe like a nurse said that to you, like a medical professional, and just yeah, that's
Yes.
really shocking. Yeah.
So I think my journey is slightly different from yours, and I'm really glad to hear you had the right professional help. I've seen therapists in the States. I've seen them in Germany, and then recently also in Hong Kong. I never found anyone who was able to kind of
Mm,
support me in that journey. But one person or one book that really stood out for me was called Brain Over Binge.
mm,
And it's not only for bulimia, but also people with binging disorders. And I think that's probably a little bit more prevalent these days,
yeah.
especially these days where we have food en masse, right? Like it's so easily accessible. And I think when we talk about all these different addictions, drug addictions,
Mm,
alcoholism, it's every addiction is horrible. I do think though, having disordered eating, you are faced with food every single day because that's part of your life. We have to nourish
yeah.
our bodies. We cannot run away from it, right? I think that's making it even more challenging to truly recover from it.
Yeah, and that fear. The fear is really pervasive because either you eat alone or you eat socially. You still need to eat, and it's a everyday thing. And it was really yeah. And thanks for sharing your story. And it must have been really difficult. And I'm sorry to hear that you didn't meet the right professional to support you through it. It must have been hard.
It was hard. And that's why I'm so glad that I stumbled across that book, Brain Over Binge. There's also a podcast. So definitely highly recommend anyone who feels that maybe this is something that they want to look into. Again, I think, because for me, it took 20 years. It needed to be at the right time. If someone would force me, maybe 10 years into it, I think I would have really struggled. But my mind was, and including MBSR. MBSR actually helped me as well, and all the other mindfulness modalities to really get me in the right track, being more open to, recover, because 20 years, it's part of my
Yeah.
identity, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know who I would be without it. And I think one of the challenges to actually wanting to recover is because I've been so successful with it at work, right? I had great relationships. I had, I was just, at a prime of my life, even having a disordered eating. So, it was definitely tough to then say, no, this, I have to change. I have to put a stop to that one. Was there a
Yeah.
specific moment for you or any experience that actually made you realize, this is it? You need to really get help or even change your relationship with food. Was there a specific moment for you?